Good morning, Shiran. This is the third discussion we are having within the last, let's say, 10 days, 10 15 days. The last two discussions we published, especially on the current economic situation of Sri Lanka and the IMF and the role of IMF and the IMF policies and their effects, were quite popular, I would say. And today I want to touch a very big topic, a topic that actually have taken the attention of from the very uber rich in Colombo to the very poorest person in Monoragala, for example. The issue is the taxing issue. As you know, as we all know who watch this program already, the government have imposed from I think 9% to 30, almost 30% income tax. And people like you and me, we were arguing for a very long time that Sri Lanka need direct tax income, and we need to tax the very high income segment in our economy just. We were actually in one discussion some months ago, we were talking about what do you call wealth tax also, but we can't actually see a wealth tax anywhere in the current tax formula. And also 30% for let's say the 1 million income bracket, it's still a very low number compared to where I live in Belgium. So when I actually come to Sri Lanka early next year as I plan, I'll be paying less tax in Sri Lanka, who's in a crisis, than I'm paying right now in Belgium. So this is one element. But I want to actually take this discussion today along three questions or three sides of the same taxing issue. One is how our taxing should be. Like, for example, you have the indirect tax, the direct tax, and the non-taxable income. Why Sri Lanka is not having proper non-taxable income? Still, we have the CPC, the CEB, and the Colombo ports as government enterprises, state-owned enterprises. But are we getting enough, or is that all we can do to actually increase the non-taxable income of the state, of the government, so we can actually increase social spending and support industrialization at a very grassroots level? This is one question. Why this tax formula is done in the current way? Is it what we need right now? Whether this tax money actually goes to the places where it actually should go to. This is a big issue. But before we go to that part, I actually want to ask you how you actually see the future of Sri Lanka's tax regime in a just manner. What Sri Lanka should have to have a very just taxing system combined with a wealth tax system, depending on how we look at it, to get Sri Lanka out of this government revenue crisis. We are in a government revenue crisis since 77, actually 78, because 77 was the last year we had a trade surplus, a proper trade surplus under Madam Bandaranaike, not Chandrika. I mean, we know what she did, but I'm talking about Silva Bandaranaike. Since then, we are in a government revenue crisis, and now it has come to a point where we actually have opportunity to think where we should go. So that's one thing. Again, going back to the previous part I was highlighting, is what we are having right now is what we need, and what can we actually do to see the change we need to see in terms of tax and government revenue, and why government revenue is actually important right now.
Right. Well, I think first off, I'll preface by saying, the whole tax thing, usually in the economic discourse, it's framed as this left versus right thing, right? If you're left-wing, you're pro-tax. If you're right-wing, you're against tax. The curious thing is that in the lead-up to us going into that sort of a left-right consensus, so the people that we would call neoliberal economists, the ones attached to, say, Verite or the Advocate Institute for advocating taxes, and some of the social democratic leftist personalities were also advocating taxes. So there was a kind of a unified front in terms of, there was bipartisan consent, you could say, for raising taxes and for raising government revenue. We know that even in the SLPP coalition, when Gota was still president, that within his party there was a lot of dissent about the tax cuts. So the old conservatives, like the Communist Party and the Lanka Samaj Party, and I believe probably Vimal Veerapansa as well, were critical of the major tax cuts, and they were quite vocal about it. I remember Tisritarna was very vocal about it. Dugunasekar was very vocal about it. I think everybody agrees that we need to raise government revenue, and I think the traditional neoliberal camp, which backed austerity programs since the 70s, understand that it's not feasible to advance that politic anymore. So they have been very careful with how they frame austerity now. So they say we shouldn't shrink government spending, rather we should increase taxation, direct taxation, and we should privatize loss-making state-owned enterprises, right, and stop financing them. So there are, all of this sounds well and good, but there are a couple of things the whole conversation, both on the left and on the right, miss out on key things, right? So one thing that no one really talks about is that from all the countries in the world, right now and historically for the last maybe 5, 10, maybe more years, Sri Lanka has the highest ratio of interest payments as a percentage of overall government expenditure. So that means when we make a budget every year, the biggest single expense is paying interest on debt.
Yes.
Right. So I think it's Sri Lanka and then probably Zambia and a couple of other developing countries. So that raises the question is why we're actually raising taxes, right? People would have you believe that we're raising taxes because, to pay for losses from corruption, which I don't even want to get into that. It's really silly. It's a systemic analysis. And then others would have you believe, the traditional left, as well as people who are normally, neoliberals talking about austerity, but they've sort of rebranded themselves as being, pro social spending and so on. That we need to raise taxes for education and for healthcare and all the lovely public goods that we all agree that we like those things and we want those things. But the fact is, the single biggest expenditure of the government is interest payments, and we're not raising taxes to increase public spending. We're raising taxes because we have to pay back the debt somehow. This is a very old, very classic trap of most empires, right? Every vassal state from Athens and the Roman Empire to even the Cholas and the British Empire, is that you have colonies that are consistently paying tribute.
Yes.
Right. So you want the population to send tribute back to the mother country, to the heart of the empire. And I said this on Twitter. So one of the criticisms saying that we've defaulted actually. So technically we're not, and we'll probably be renegotiating our debt for the next 4 years. So we won't be servicing debt for the next 4 years. That's true. But part of the debt negotiation is to actually show the creditors that we are raising enough revenue to service the debt, right? So that whole process, a precondition is that we raise taxes, a precondition on the part of the creditors. So they're not raising tax out of a popular demand from the people for public services. They're raising taxes because the creditors demand taxes being raised so that they can collect their debts. Then the next argument is people will say, well, we pay our debts in foreign currency, not in local currency. They don't need rupees. Yes, but how do you think the government gets those rupees? The government can't print US dollars, and the government can own dollar-earning enterprises, as it does in several countries, but in Sri Lanka, the government is not allowed to do that for various political reasons, right? So the government doesn't earn dollars. So the only thing it can do is either print rupees or tax rupees from the population and convert that in the market into dollars and pay it back.
Yes.
So what we've done in Sri Lanka since the 70s, like you mentioned, in 78, I think was the last time we had a trade surplus.
Yes.
So we went into a trade deficit by liberalizing the economy. And we basically had to borrow for periodic balance of payments crises. And at the same time, when we have a balance of payments crisis, the currency depreciates. So our debt stock is increasing. In dollar terms, it's increasing. And as the currency depreciates, in rupee terms, it's increasing even more exponentially. So the amount that we have to pay for debt is just constantly growing, and it's just squeezing out every other line expenditure that is there for the government. So it's squeezing out the government's ability to pay for infrastructure, to pay for healthcare, to pay for education, and all of those great public goods that we can all agree that we want those things, right? So that's the main thing that I don't see being centered in this whole conversation, right? And then with this, I'm sure people bring up like debt cancellation, all of that. Again, that's a whole other story. I think debt cancellation, if it were to ever happen, sovereign debt cancellation is not something that Sri Lanka can do on its own. It'll have to enter into a very large allegiance with other countries, right? And any leader who chooses to make that a campaign is probably going to get assassinated.
Yes.
So
in a very horrible way, actually, not going to be nice.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so just remembering the fact that this is why taxes are being raised, right? They're not being raised to do anything good. They're being raised because creditors demand it, and also because of Sri Lanka's historic trade deficit and the fact that the open economy was pushed on us in a very terrible way that didn't take into consideration the fact that we didn't have the productive capacity to compete in an open economy.
Yes.
So yeah, anyway, that's one point. That's the main point I wanted to start with. Moving on from there, though, how can we have a fair taxation system? In a way, I think the current taxes are a small step forward in the sense that, okay, now we have direct income tax and it's graded, so the higher you earn, the more you're taxed. As a principle, that's fair. We could argue maybe about what the starting base should be and all of that. I don't really want to get into those like technical details because I think we're discussing more the whole politics of it. Couple of things that alarm me from the taxes is that they have exempted export services, so the IT sector, but they have left the taxes on manufacturing and on export manufacturing, which is just utterly ridiculous, right? The argument that I assume the argument is that there are less inputs that are going into IT aside from the standard fixed investments of the computers and so on, which is very short-sighted. It's typical economist way of looking at things in black and white, right? The real dynamism comes from manufacturing. The real the technological dynamism, the scope for greater division of labor, for greater synergies and greater economies of scale comes from the manufacturing sector. So if you were going to give someone tax concessions, it should be for manufacturing, it should be for export-oriented manufacturing.
Yes.
They haven't done that. They've, in typical Ranil style, gone for the service sector again. We've also seen that there have not been really huge changes in the capital gains taxes.
Yes.
Or in the taxes on stock market transactions.
Yes.
And there's no wealth tax or any talk of, as far as I know, any talk of a land tax. Right? So here's the other thing. So those sectors that I mentioned, the capital gains taxes, so the gains that you make from interest, the gains that you make from stock market transactions, the gains that you make surely from owning land, those are fundamentally rentier interest. I mean, that's making money from money.
Yes.
Or from assets. You're not doing anything productive to the economy. In fact, you're a burden on the economy, right? Because you raise the overall cost structure of the economy.
Yes. Actually, Shiran, to make an input on that, the number of stock traders who invested on, let's say, energy and export-oriented industries on in the stock market, they profited billions in the last 1 year. They profited billions. I used to do a small time trading when I was studying to find my pocket money, so I'm very well versed on how it happens. So I actually just checked out of curiosity how the market performed and who profited, and I was shocked. I was truly shocked. Some people actually multiplied their rupee wealth by 5 times. 5 times. Yes.
I mean, people played the game very well during that stock market rally of COVID-19. The people who knew what to do and had the money to do something about it. I knew what was going on, knew what to do. I didn't have any money to actually make money off of it, so it was kind of depressing. But yeah, so Anyway, what I was getting at is there's this whole other aspect that we don't talk about of that I mentioned before of non-tax revenue, right?
Yes.
So, part of this neoliberal plan is to raise direct taxes on the people and then privatize natural monopolies to private players, right? And these are natural monopolies. So when we talk about energy, transport, and infrastructure, the private sector loves to get those things because they don't have to do anything. It's literally ready-made infrastructure, and all you have to do is collect the rent on it. You can
Yes.
have the level of investment that you have to put in as a owner of these things is quite minimal, and you can just create artificial scarcity and collect income. And this is basically the Reaganite, Thatcherite,
Yes.
neoliberal solution. It's what they did to and they destroyed industry in the West by doing this, right?
Yes.
By giving natural monopolies to the private sector, and by not taxing rentiers, but by taxing like regular people.
Actually,
And
take UK. I mean, all these Colombo lib fools or zombie economists, they take UK as their, like holy grail. If they ever bothered to study what Margaret Thatcher did to the British industry and how that actually have translated into a massive economic vulnerability right now. How
yeah,
even the fact that they can't even regulate inflation because of the energy prices, and how much British Petroleum, for example, how many hundreds of billions of pounds they are profiting the highest in history when the economy is going down. I mean, that's the case all throughout Europe, and they have never bothered to study it. They advocate
sure.
the Thatcherite, Reaganite economics, but they don't actually bother to read the next page, what happens after.
Exactly. I mean, if you just look at throughout the post-COVID period, some of the most profitable sectors in the West were real estate and oil refining, both
Yes.
natural monopolies, right?
Yes.
Um, it's and also people who are involved in commodity trade and so on, because and in logistics.
Yes.
These are all natural monopolies, right? So people who are in shipping made money, people who are in refining and trading of minerals made money, people who own real estate made tons of money.
Oh yes.
In the West, it's private individuals who own this, right? These aren't even capitalists in the strictly technical sense of the term. These are just like feudal lords, basically.
Yes.
In China, you have a different model of economic governance. All of those sectors that I mentioned are dominated by the state and state-owned enterprises. So the government made money off of it, and the government was able to provide infrastructure and jobs and price stability throughout the pandemic and up till now. Of course, China has certain challenges, but you can see the clear difference between the West and the Chinese model, where in the West, all of the monopolies are owned by the private sector, and that increases the price level for regular people. And in China, the government owns all the natural monopolies. So the government can play the market, and the government can pass on the benefit to the majority of the people. I
And
think this is
Shiran, to make another small point, I'm sorry, I'm disturbing your very nice
no, 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 go on.
discussion. For example, in Germany, the most industrialized nation in Europe, mainland Europe at least, or Europe in general, 50% of their forest lands are owned by feudal lords, no feudal lords or private people. I mean, the forests. These are forests we are talking about, natural parks, and they are completely off access to any public interest in most cases. Belgium, Brussels. Brussels is a city with the largest surface area for parks or natural forest for any capital city in the world. One of the largest percentages. But most of the forests are still owned by the king or the royal family or the feudal lords. So they are the ones who actually profited. Our own property prices literally almost doubled. I mean, yes, it's good for people who actually own these mega properties, but not for the state, not for the ordinary poor, very low working class population.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, coming back to Sri Lanka, I guess we're in a unique position because technically the government still has significant control over energy. At think the amount of control we have over logistics and the ports, that's probably debatable. That's subject to a lot of geopolitical pressures as
Yes.
well. The government is the major owner of land, and for a long time, the local governments in China, their main source of income was actually through ownership of land, right?
Yes.
Through leasing it out to the private sector. That came with its own externalities over time, but the Chinese officials are dealing with it now. But Sri Lanka is we're at a different stage of development now. So the fact is, the government has all of these things that they can make money with. I don't understand why Sapugaskanda is such a basket case when the oil refining industry is probably the most profitable rent yielding industry that has existed in the past couple of decades. It's simply a problem of underinvestment.
Yes.
And these are all ways in which the government can raise revenue. So the government owns a huge amount of land. It can simply lease land out to people, to farmers at a nominal rate to increase food production and to have industrial activity. But these are not at all seen as viable ways to increase revenue. And I'm not sure why. Of course, the economists now will say, okay, that's too complicated. But just because it's complicated doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't do it. I mean, that's probably why you should do it.
The reason why you have a state is to do complicated things.
Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing a bunch of stories, even in a lot of the Mahaveli schemes and so on. There are plots of land that have been given to private investors that have never been developed, right? And they paid. These people paid back in the 80s or something. So the entire land valuation, the entire land of Sri Lanka has to be re-evaluated, especially with the infrastructure that's been built since the end of the war. And the government should basically tax back the inflated value of that land, because it's basically government activity that has led to the increase in the value of land, the building of the highways and the ports and the expansion of electrification that happened after the war. All of those things. Basically, taxing away economic rents is something the government needs to look at to increase revenue, to minimize the amount of direct taxes that go into income earners.
To ask you one very focused question, what do you think would be the effect on the current tax proposal that Ranil Wickremesinghe have tabled? The decision to actually tax the people who are wage earners, but not going beyond that. What would be the effects on the real ground economy?
Well, to be fair, looking at the tax brackets, right, the taxation is on the top, something I think top 10% of income earners, right? If you earn more than 1 lakh a month in Sri Lanka, you're about in the top 10%.
Yes.
So technically, you are, you are taxing the wealthiest, and morally you can justify that. It's just that Sri Lanka is a poor country, so even when you say top 10% in Sri Lanka,
it's not really.
It's not what you would. It's not the same thing that you would think when you're in Germany or the US or something like that. I mean, that someone who earns 1 lakh a month in Sri Lanka right now
hardly
doesn't necessarily lead a very great life with the amount of inflation. I mean, 100,000 now is basically like 50,000 5 years ago.
Yes.
So, I mean, there are a lot of people I know who are working in the private sector and earning that much now, and they're complaining. And of course, I try to talk to them and make them say, this is for the best in the long run. But I think it is undeniable that it will drive an amount of brain drain, right? I think that's just a fact. Someone
but
who
on
has
the other hand, Shiran, the wannabe self-proclaimed professionals who went to Goldface with a tie and a coat and couldn't figure out whether why they can't speak Sinhala, even though they have actually lived their entire life in a Sinhala cultural bubble. They say now they are going to migrate, but most of these places that they want to migrate to, they have much higher taxes. I pay on average like more than 50% of my income. It goes to this tax or that
Sure.
tax or this payment or that payment.
Yeah.
Other than places
So
like Dubai, which the market is very small now, it's already anyway saturated by the Indian IT sector. You go to US, you will pay more tax. You will come to Europe anywhere, you will pay more tax, and then
yeah, I think people don't really care about the tax rate. It's the actual quality of life
yeah,
that you
quality of
get.
life.
The
Yes.
fact is, you're increasing taxes now at a time when quality of life has dropped for everyone, including a significant chunk of the top 10% of income earners. So on top of that, when you add taxes, yeah, I understand why many would probably want to leave. Um, yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about that. I mean, of course, it sucks for someone earning 100,000, but then I think of course people earning 500,000 above should probably definitely be taxed.
Yes, I was thinking about this line actually. I was thinking this tax reform could have been much better justified and better put to better use actually if they tax people gaining at least 300,000 plus, not below that, but combine with a wealth tax that you can wealth tax and a capital gain tax, or let's say stock market gains tax. So
Yeah.
people actually see how it is taxed, and then the government actually established transparency, especially this the US State Department fund, Advocata and Verite, they always talk about transparency. So why don't we establish transparency and show people how this tax money specifically increase public spending, how this tax money is going to be covering the cost of giving 2 meals for every school kid who come to school, the breakfast and the lunch, how this tax money is going to increase the salaries of the doctors or the teachers, for example, or how they actually can be used to let's say cover part of the operational cost of small industries,
Hmm.
especially the export oriented ones. For example, in COVID times, 80% of certain businesses, small businesses, were covered by the state in Europe.
Yeah.
At least in Belgium, where I am from, which I intend to leave for means and purposes, did that. That's how they actually save the small time industries. Now they are going down with this anti-Russian war over Ukraine, thanks to NATO. But why we can't actually establish transparency and establish a proper economic purpose where this tax revenue is going to go to? I mean, this is one of the main reasons why people are feeling a little bit angry. Even the ones who actually are not going to be taxed under this regime, they feel angry because they think, okay, this tax money is going to be wasted. So
Hmm.
it's an opportunity for Advocata to Verite to demand true transparency where it actually matters.
Yeah. I don't know to what extent the government doing that will change people's perceptions. Because as I said, I'm not necessarily against the taxes, but I just want to keep reminding people that it's not like there are a lot of aspects to it. So um, I think the people who are angry about it are going to be angry about it, regardless of what you explain to them, because it hurts to lose some of your income. So
Yes.
that's no matter who you are. So I think that's not the point. But I think what we need to start looking at more of the land tax. I think that's something really important that we have to look at now, because land values have gone up so much in the last few years. Um, and I think also, Sri Lanka has a very incomplete version of land reform.
Yes.
As the land reforms that were undertaken in the what is first the Paddy Lands Act, and then again in the 70s, they took away the tea plantations.
Yes.
So this wasn't the same kind of land reforms that we saw in communist countries like the Soviet Union and in China, or in capitalist countries like Korea or Japan. It's something completely different, right? It's this Sri Lankan land reform story is kind of like a Frankenstein monster, um, because if you a good foundation, if you want industrial capital development, is you take the land from the landlords and you redistribute it to small farmers of a relatively equal size of plots of land, depending on their fertility and so on. And then you have an internal free market, and these farmers compete with each other, and then eventually you have a growth of capitalism, which is what happened in Korea and in Japan. There's a different system that happened in the Soviet Union, where the land was basically they incorporated them into cooperatives, and then you had state farms, and then you basically scaled up large scale enterprises by state ownership and collective ownership of land. China is somewhere in between that. They tried a little bit of both. In Sri Lanka, I mean, the government took the land. They've never given it back to the people in any meaningful sense to have industrial capitalism grow, and they've never gone full on into the Soviet style, state farming model either. So you just have a lot of land that's just frankly not being well used. The people in the private sector who get access to the land usually get it through corruption or other means. And I think it's just like a no-brainer, right? Because Sri Lanka is a small country. The ratio of arable land per capita is very small. Then coastal land is also very precious because it's required for tourism, for fishing, and for ports, which are very important. So, theoretically speaking, the value of land in Sri Lanka should be huge.
Yes.
Right? And with the government being the biggest landowner, it should be able to make a ton of money just from land. But unfortunately, I think there's no political leadership to make the most of that asset.
Yes, I think there's a good effect to be taken if the government actually wants to have this kind of land taxation, wealth tax. They could actually combine this and increase the government revenue considerably, and then they could actually subsidize food items, so the inflation actually either come down or at least stabilize where it is right now. And one of the problems people have is that they see whether everyone is being taxed or not, that's a different matter, but they see income tax has been put, but their cost of living is actually going up. So if the tax regime can be redesigned in a way where you actually increase public spending and also at least stabilize the quality of life, the falling of the quality of life, so people get a sense of, okay, things are stable now, they're not collapsing further, and we could actually try to push it up. And this is what is not happening. And I think the issue is compounded by the fact that the government have, first, their entire economic focus is to service the IMF policy framework that has been imposed on us. I mean, imposed on the people, but then willingly adopted by the central bank and the finance ministry and the Vikramasinghe's cronies, or Rajapaksa's cronies also in this case, unfortunately. But they have no intention of doing it. They have no focus on the quality of life aspect in terms of industrialization outcome. They have no focus on reorienting our foreign policy and our international trade relationships with Asia and especially East Africa, instead of relying on the recession hit mainland Europe and UK and the US. So maybe what we need before any tax reform, whatever, is a recalibration of what the state needs right now, to understand what the state needs, and the recalibration of the policy focus, the public policy focus of the government. And this actually, if people can see this happening, I think there can be a trust built. So any new political alliance, whether it's established group right now or a new movement that is coming up, this can be a very good case to think of. I mean, very good thing to actually focus on, because the benefits are quite a lot for the state, for the government, for them, for the people.
I think the word I would use to describe what you're saying is basically industrial policy. So
Yes,
a lot of these neoclassical economists now, I mean, um, it's all cut up into like these little parts that we talk about separately. We talk about, tax policy, trade policy, monetary policy, but all of that comes under one thing, which is, what are we doing any of this for? It's industrial policy, right? We want to increase the productive forces of the economy. We want to maximize the productivity of individuals. We want uh, capital investment. We want to minimize the amount of rent seeking, and I mean rent seeking in the classical sense of the term, not the way these neoclassical types use the term rent seeking. Um, and to do all of that, like the monetary policy, the tax policy, the education policy, all of that has to be in the service of this one goal, right? And this one goal has commonly been tied into the whole project of nation or state building.
yes,
Unless we can see it like that and articulate the policy requirements based on those things, I think where it's, like headless chickens just like running around, and, there's bunch of isolated academics, and each one has their own little niche and their own little pet
topic.
problem that they
Yeah,
like
yeah,
to talk about, right? On Twitter or on a newspaper column. It's like, okay, I'm the guy who always writes about money printing is bad. I'm the guy who writes about we need to raise taxes. I'm the guy who writes about we should, open up trade. And, all of these things are just spoken about in complete isolation. But it's all, when we really come down to it, the reality of who we are, where we want to go, what we want to do, it comes down to industrial policy, it comes down to nation building and state building. And this all has to be brought together for that purpose. So, like, it has to be the right recipe. Everything has to complement each other. That's the only way that we can. So if you want to raise tax, sure, we need to raise tax, but also in the long run, we're a very small, very poor economy, so we want to increase the tax base as well, and that's a problem that tax policy alone can't solve the problem of the
yes.
tax base. That has to be industrial policy for that. Yeah, and all these things are interrelated, basically.
Do you think, Shiran, just before our session concludes today, do you think Sri Lankan population actually understand this tax policy, not tax policy, the industrial policy framework, the need for industrial policy framework? Do you think people understand this very organically? Because not people are not economists, people are not economic historians like you, people are not political activists like me, but more or less my experience, I think your experience is same. People understand that what need to be done to fix this nation,
Yeah,
but,
I think I think in an organic sense, people understand it in the sense that, I mean, if you know talk to an average person, whether whether they're like a service sector worker or a farmer or a three-wheel driver, and you strike up a conversation, and my Sinhalese is not very good, but when I try to talk to you, I usually bring up a line like, the problem is we don't make anything in Sri Lanka. No? I
yes.
just put that out there. Lanka ko nispatana karanna hai.
Oh,
And then they take the conversation from there. I don't have to say anything else because
yes,
they understand what that means. I mean,
yes,
I said this to a guy once who was working at like a posh shopping mall, right? He was I think it was some dessert donuts or something like that, and he
yeah,
was pointing at all the light fixtures, saying which countries they come from. He says, when the lights go out, we have to wait until the shipment comes from Japan. Like, why can't we make that here? My brother is an engineer, and we could do this, but we don't have the capital goods and investment to do this, right? Then you talk to the ones I said the same line to a three-wheel driver, and they're like, yeah, that's true. All the parts of this three-wheeler, we have to wait for them to come from India and all of that. But this is not pretty complicated. We can probably fabricate it in Sri Lanka
yes,
if we were given the opportunity, the chance to do so. Um, Same with once I took my car to be fixed because the radio was broken. I just again asked the guy, and the guy was explaining to me how you can make a radio, right? And what you need to do it. So yeah, I think in an organic sense, people get it. Uh,
but does the
people like
political establishment, or whether the
no,
new, do they actually understand the
Yeah.
need to provide a political platform so people can structure these organic ideas into a coherent political ideology. Do the political
I,
establishment understand that there is a vacuum for
yeah.
50 goddamn years?
I think the political establishment, at least parts of it, have always understood it, maybe not to the fullest complexity of it, but have understood the basic gist of it, at least since with the Marxists since the 30s, with the nationalists since the 1950s,
Yes.
right? But I think they know that this is dangerous territory. They know that if you choose to go down this path, you might not survive. That it's much easier to not threaten the prevailing geopolitical industrial powers, predominantly in the West. And I think it's no coincidence that the few leaders who have tried to do, even in the most minute way, something about this are either killed or demonized.
Yes. Cinema
Right?
was demonized, Premadasa was killed.
Yeah, Bandaranaike was also killed.
Yes, Bandaranaike was
Um,
also killed.
right? And people forget there's this really dumb liberal theory that he was killed by a Buddhist monk because he unleashed the forces of
Yeah,
bad
but the Buddhist monk had nothing to do with it. It's
That's nothing to do with
established.
it,
Yeah,
right?
it's
The
established fact.
problem was that he tried to nationalize a monopoly, which is the shipping and logistics sector.
Yes.
Right? This is a natural monopoly. The government should keep control of it so that they can, maintain a reasonable price of the transports of inputs and outputs, so that you can have a good functioning production economy. And the monk wanted some contract to import rice or some shit.
Yeah.
Bandaranaike's advisors told him not to, and he was killed for it. Like, it's pretty clear cut. In this case, it was the Rentiers who killed Bandaranaike. But anyway, that's delving a lot into history. But I think that's the problem. I mean, Howard Nicholas mentioned this once in one of his talks. When I met him, he says that when he talks to politicians in private, they all understand it, but they can't do anything about it, or at least they don't have the guts to do anything about it. The only way you can do something about it is to actually build a mass movement. And I think obviously in Sri Lanka, one of the main barriers to that is the identity politics, this ethnic stuff, which always is, coincidentally, it's also used as a wedge to divide people and to prevent this from ever happening.
Yes.
Right? Even the whole concept of separatism, right, from economic perspective, what it fundamentally does is that it breaks apart the home market.
Yes.
Right? By breaking apart the home market, you prevent the development of economies of scale.
Yes.
So large empires have always tried to make sure that, in the words of Brzezinski, the famous US foreign policy analyst, he said, we have to stop the barbarians from getting together.
Yes.
He was referring, I think, probably to Russia and China, basically.
And also to India. This is what they want to do for India.
Yeah.
And Indian diplomats and the bureaucracy understood this very clearly. Unfortunately, ours didn't. Not to the level they should have.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's always been divide and rule, and it's not for any emotional reason. It's just economies of scale. We can't let you get bigger than we are.
Yeah. And to conclude with your remark, Shiran, I think we came to a very good place in the discussion. I would say I would like to conclude with this kind of proposal. If Sri Lankan people who are watching this, who understands what we're talking about, or who don't understand what we're talking about, if you are Sri Lankan, if you really care, then it's time to actually ask the people who actually want your vote what your industrial policy is. How do you actually intend to address the big picture, instead of actually picking pieces from pieces that is engineered by some think tank or wannabe think tank or some neoliberal in some foreign paid air conditioned office in the World Trade Center. Ask people what the industrial policy is. Ask people how we actually try to engineer, how we should engineer the entire economic system in a proper perspective, not by trying to address bits and pieces. And And if the establishment doesn't want to have an industrial policy, or even if they don't have the backbone to actually advocate for one, then pick your people who have the backbone to stand with you. And for the political elite who are listening to this, if you want to survive in this political environment in the next 5 years, you only have to do to provide a structure that people can provide a platform for the people to structure this organic industrial policy understanding they have. Provide that platform, help them get where they want, and show leadership that you say that you are, full of. It's very simple. It's very simple, the path out of this. I mean, people can actually do the most comfortable thing right now and get wiped out in whatever political means that is coming their way. I don't know what exactly will happen. But if we are to survive, if we are to actually change our fortunes, if we are to increase the quality of life, if we are to actually preserve our sovereignty and preserve the right we have as Sri Lankans to live and keep our way of living, our livelihoods, our cultural identity, whatever that may be. Maybe you are Sinhalese, Buddhist, you are Catholic, Christian, Tamil, Muslim, whatever, Burger. You have a right to be a Sri Lankan, and if you want that right to be preserved and defended for, then it is time actually for us to collectively demand that we industrialize and we actually reorganize our government, reorganize our state to get where we have to get to industrialize and work with the rising Asia and Africa. This is where our heritage lies, and this is where our future lies. So the equation is very simple. It's a matter of finding courage to say no to this US State Department funded white collar criminals in Colombo, and the politicians and the establishment who doesn't have the backbone to actually say it outright and provide the leadership people want. If people can't get the leadership they want from the establishment, I think people should actually find the new movements, new leaders, new breed of leaders. People need to come out. People like you, me, and others need to come out, and the people who don't want to come out at least need to actually understand this and stand by with them. Stand with them. So if you have any concluding remarks, Shiran, this is the time. We would end the session. I'm quite happy where we actually end up today in the discussion.
Yeah. I think you concluded it perfectly. Nothing more to add.
Okay, then until another such time, have a good day. I will be publishing this later in the day. Hopefully more and more people watch this, more and more people get motivated to think along this big picture problems we have, instead of picking small pieces like Shiran rightly, very eloquently put. He's a very eloquent speaker compared to me. I'm not that much of a soft, stylish speaker. Thank you, Shiran, for your time again. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.